The metal door slid open with a hiss, and cold air hit Lorena's soft green skin. Her steps were small, quiet, almost invisible on the steel floor. She held her diplomatic tablet close to her chest, as if it could protect her. She was the youngest diplomat from the peaceful world of Luralis, and this was her first visit to a human outpost. She had heard stories about humans wild, dangerous, and completely unpredictable. They were called the savages of the stars by many alien races. Her fingers trembled slightly as she walked deeper into the meeting chamber. There were 5 humans inside, sitting casually around a large table. They laughed, drank something dark from mugs, and wore no helmets, no armor, no fear. She couldn't understand it. How could they be so relaxed in a place like this? Her heart skipped when her translator whispered in her ear, "The tall one at the end of the table is Commander Jace Thorne," it said softly. She turned her eyes toward him and froze. He was taller than the others, broad-shouldered, with a dark uniform that hugged his frame. His face was hard, but not cruel. His eyes sharp but not cold. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't angry either. He looked at her with calm curiosity, like a scientist watching something rare. Lorena's breath caught in her throat, and she quickly looked away. Why did he look so calm, so steady, when she could barely keep her hands from shaking? She remembered the warning her elder gave her before she left. "Humans are not like us, child. They fight for sport. They survive by force. Do not trust their kindness." And yet, as Commander Jace stood up and slowly walked toward her, she didn't see a savage. She saw a man who moved like a soldier, but stopped like a diplomat. His voice was deep, but not loud. "Welcome to Outpost Delta, Ambassador Lorena," he said simply. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For a moment, she only nodded, her eyes wide like a child seeing fire for the first time. Then, finally, she managed to whisper, "To thank you." He didn't laugh at her stutter. He only gave a small nod and gestured to the table. "Please take a seat. We've been waiting for this meeting." She walked slowly, carefully, trying not to trip or look foolish. Her long cloak brushed the floor behind her like mist. As she sat down, her hands clutched the tablet tightly. The other humans continued their conversation, but quieter now. Lorena could feel Jace's eyes on her, but he didn't speak again. Instead, he leaned back and listened, like he was studying the room. She tried to listen too, but her thoughts kept returning to his face. Why didn't he match the stories? Where was the violence, the madness, the burning fury the elders warned her about? Why did she feel warmth in her chest when he spoke her name? After the first hour, the meeting was over, and everyone stood. Lorena moved to leave quickly, wanting to escape the strange pressure in her heart, but as she stepped toward the exit, she heard his voice again. "Ambassador," he said behind her. She turned, slowly, carefully, and met his eyes once more. "I hope we can speak again. Alone next time." Her heart beat faster, like wings flapping in her chest. She didn't know what to say, so she only nodded again, and then walked out the door without looking back. But even as she walked through the long hallways, her mind stayed with him. Why did he want to speak to her alone? What could he want from a shy Loralian diplomat like her? And why, above all else, was she hoping it would happen soon? In her guest room, she stared at the stars through the window. Her long fingers brushed against the edge of her cloak. She whispered softly to herself in her native tongue, "He is not what I expected. He is dangerous." But not like the others. She didn't know it yet. But the meeting that made her tremble was just the beginning. Lorena woke with her heart beating fast, her skin glowing faintly under the soft lights of her guest room. She sat up quickly, eyes wide, unsure if it had been a dream or a memory. But his face was still in her mind, sharp and clear. Commander Jace Thorne, the human who looked nothing like the monster she had feared. She touched her cheek, feeling warmth there, something she didn't fully understand. Her people didn't talk about these feelings often. Attraction was something private, something controlled, but since stepping into that room, her thoughts had not been her own. She stood slowly and walked to the mirror. looking at herself with strange eyes. Was this really happening? Why did his voice echo in her mind? Why did her chest tighten when she remembered how he said her name? The door chimed gently, breaking her thoughts. She turned fast, pulling her cloak tighter around her body. "Ambassador Lorena," said the voice outside. "You are requested in the gardens by the human commander." She froze. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for the door. The garden was supposed to be neutral ground, a place of silence and peace. Why would he ask to meet her there, and why now? She didn't speak as she walked the long hallway. Her soft steps silent compared to the heavy boots of the guards. Others passed her but didn't speak. Some watched her with curiosity. It was strange. Being among humans so loud, so fast, so full of emotions they didn't even try to hide. And yet, in all that chaos, it was one quiet look from Jace that disturbed her the most. When she entered the garden, she stopped. He was already there, sitting on a stone bench under a glowing tree from her homeworld. It had been planted here long ago, part of a peace gift during a forgotten treaty. The soft purple leaves shimmered in the light, casting a glow on his face. He looked up at her. And this time he smiled. It wasn't wide or bold, just a small, calm curve of his lips. But it hit her harder than any shout. "I thought you might like the gardens," he said, standing up slowly. She nodded, her throat dry. "They remind me of home," she whispered, not sure why she told him that. He gestured to the bench, and she sat carefully, keeping space between them. The silence stretched, not heavy, but deep, like the ocean before a storm. "Do we frighten you?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. She looked at him, unsure how to answer. "Yes," she said after a pause, "but not in the way I expected." He raised an eyebrow, curious but not offended. "You mean we're not eating raw meat and yelling in battle songs?" he said, his voice playful. She blinked, confused, then realized he was joking. A small sound escaped her lips, not quite a laugh, but almost. He tilted his head slightly, watching her. "That's good," he said. "You laughed." "I didn't," she replied quickly, but her cheeks turned a soft blue glow. He didn't tease her, just nodded. "You're not like the others either," he said. "You're careful, like you're always thinking 5 steps ahead." She looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "That's how we survive," she said. "Your kind runs into fire. We wait and study the wind." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "I think both are needed," he said, "but sometimes fire needs wind." She turned to look at him, surprised by the poetry in his words. "Do you always speak like this?" she asked. "No," he said, and this time he smiled wider. "Only when I'm nervous." That answer struck her in the heart. He was nervous too, maybe not in the same way, but he wasn't as calm as he looked. That thought made her chest feel lighter. They sat in silence again, but now it felt different. Not awkward, but full of quiet energy. Something had shifted. She didn't know what it meant, but she didn't want to leave. When she finally stood to go, he didn't stop her. He only said, "You can come here anytime. No guards, no orders, just you." She nodded once, then walked away with slow steps. Her fingers brushed against the soft leaves of the glowing tree, and this time she didn't tremble. The alarm rang out like a scream through the metal halls. Red lights flashed across the ceiling as doors sealed with a heavy hiss. Lorena's breath caught in her throat as her boots skidded on the smooth floor. She wasn't supposed to be here, not alone. The entire outpost had gone into lockdown, and she had no idea why. Her fingers tapped the small communicator on her wrist, but there was only static. She turned sharply and ran down the next corridor, hoping to find an open door or another soul. Instead, she found a room, its door half open, lights flickering. Inside, without thinking, she slipped through and leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling fast. Then she heard the footsteps, firm, steady, human. She spun around, heart racing, eyes wide. Commander Jace stepped through the same doorway and stopped when he saw her. Of all people, it had to be him. Of all places, they had to be trapped together. He looked surprised, then calm, then something else she couldn't name. She backed away slightly, her fingers pressing against her communicator again. Still nothing but silence. "Well," he said, glancing at the sealed door. "Looks like we're stuck." She didn't answer, just stared at him, trying to hide the shaking in her hands. He noticed anyway, but said nothing. Instead, he stepped back and sat on a nearby crate, giving her space. "I don't think it's an attack," he said softly. "Probably a system test gone wrong." She wanted to believe him, but every part of her was tense, alert, not because of danger outside, but because of the man inside the room with her. The man she feared, the man she dreamed about, the man who made her feel something she didn't understand. He looked around the room, then back at her. "Strange place for a diplomat to be during lockdown," he said. "I was trying to find the records hall." She said quietly, "I took a wrong turn." He nodded like it made perfect sense. Then he leaned back and smiled just a little. "I used to get lost in this place all the time," he said. "First few months. I walked in circles." Her head tilted slightly, confused. "You," she said. "You seem like someone who never gets lost." He laughed once, not loud but real. "Everyone's lost sometimes," he said, "especially when they pretend. They're not." Those words hit something inside her. She didn't know why, but she stepped a little closer. The room was small, quiet, the lights no longer flashing red. Just the sound of two hearts beating hers fast, his steady. Minutes passed with no alarm, no rescue, no announcement, only silence, broken by breath, by thought. She sat down slowly, keeping her distance but not as far as before. He didn't speak, and neither did she. He picked up a small device from the crate. "Something broken and dusty. Old translator," he said, turning it in his hands. "First-gen stuff." She nodded, recognizing the shape. "Your people helped build these," she said, "but never used them." "We were too proud," he said. "You were too wise." Her eyes met his again, and this time she didn't look away. There was no mask in his gaze, only honesty. She wanted to ask him why he was being kind, why he wasn't like the humans in her stories, why he kept looking at her like she mattered. "I used to think your kind hated us," she said slowly. "Some do," he replied, "but not me." She breathed in sharply, then said something she never thought she would. "I don't hate you either." His head tilted, eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but surprise. "Then what is it you feel?" he asked. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. What could she say? Fear, wonder, confusion, warmth, all tangled inside her like vines. She stood suddenly, too fast, her balance nearly slipping. "I need to go," she said, voice tight. "Doors still locked," he said gently, not moving. She stared at the sealed entrance like it was a wall between her thoughts and her heart. Then the door beeped and hissed open without warning. She didn't move, even though she could. Neither did he. They just stood there, in the doorway, looking at each other. "You're free to go," he said. "But you don't have to." She blinked once, then stepped past him, slow and careful. But at the edge of the hallway, she paused and looked back. "I might return," she whispered, and then she disappeared into the corridor. But her mind stayed behind. Asterisk. She couldn't sleep. The stars outside her window blinked like quiet eyes, watching her think. Lirena sat curled on her bedding, hands wrapped around her knees. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, not in anger, not in fear, but in that calm silence they had shared. That silence was louder now than any alarm. The translator on her wrist beeped with a soft tone. It wasn't an official call, just a private message, one line, simple and direct. "Are you awake?" it said, and it was from him. Her fingers hovered over the reply, then typed slowly, "Yes." A few moments passed, and then another message appeared. "Meet me where the leaves glow." She didn't think, she didn't plan. She just stood and left her room. The hallways were quiet, dim, like the outpost itself was asleep. She moved fast, her cloak brushing the floor with every step. Her heart beat too loudly in her chest. But she didn't stop. The garden was empty except for him. He was standing beneath the same glowing tree from before. Its soft purple leaves shimmered in the night light. He didn't turn when she approached. He only spoke in a quiet voice, as if afraid to break something delicate. "I couldn't sleep either." She stopped beside him, close enough to feel the warmth from his arm. "I have questions," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Ask." She hesitated, eyes fixed on the tree. "Why did you ask me here?" He was silent for a moment, then said, "Because I wanted to hear your voice again." Her lips parted. "But..." She said nothing. He turned to look at her now, eyes soft but searching. "There's something about you, Lyrina," he said. "Something I can't stop thinking about." She stepped back slightly, not in fear, but from the weight of the moment. Her chest felt too tight, her thoughts too loud. "You don't even know me," she said quietly. "I want to," he replied, not even blinking. The wind stirred the glowing leaves, casting shadows that danced over their faces. She turned away, afraid her expression would give her away. "You're human," she whispered, "and I'm not supposed to feel this way about you." "I'm not supposed to feel this way about you either," he said. "But I do." The words hung in the air like smoke. Lyrina felt something shift deep inside her, something powerful and frightening. No one from her world had ever told her what to do with feelings like these. She had trained in politics, negotiation, patience. Not this. Jace stepped forward once, then stopped. "I won't come closer unless you want me to," he said gently. She turned around slowly, her eyes wide, glowing softly in the garden light. "You make me feel unsteady," she said. "Like my thoughts don't belong to me anymore." He gave a small smile. "Same here." Then silence returned, soft and deep. He sat down at the base of the tree, and after a moment, she joined him. They didn't talk about treaties or peace. They didn't speak of war or fear. Instead, they spoke of little things, stars, food, colors, music, things that didn't belong to any one world, things that made them feel like maybe they weren't so different. She told him about her pet from childhood, a small glowing creature that sang at night. He told her about the rivers on Earth, where he used to swim as a boy. Her laugh was soft, but it stayed longer this time. His smile didn't fade so quickly. Time passed without notice, until a soft tone sounded in the distance, signaling curfew. Lyrina stood slowly, brushing her cloak. "I should go," she said, her voice low. He nodded but didn't rise. "I'll stay a little longer," he said. "It's quiet here." She turned, took a few steps, then stopped. Looking back, she whispered, "Thank you for not being what I feared." And then she walked into the dark hall, her heart louder than her steps. He stayed under the tree, looking up through the glowing branches, and for the first time in years, Jace Thorne felt something growing in the quiet, something soft, strange, and maybe dangerous, but he didn't want to stop it. A red light blinked behind the garden wall, almost hidden by the glowing leaves. It was not a star, not part of the outpost design. It was a camera, small, illegal, silent, and someone was watching the recordings with narrowed eyes. Inside a dark control room, a figure leaned closer to the screen. They paused the video just as Lyrina truly smiled for the first time. Next to her, Commander Jace sat under the tree like nothing was wrong, but to the watcher, everything was wrong. The voice crackled through a cum line. "She's becoming too close to the human," another voice answered, cold and sharp. "Break them apart before it becomes a problem." Lyrina didn't know that her steps were being traced. She didn't know eyes followed her through the corridors now. All she felt was the strange new warmth growing inside her, something hopeful, something terrifying. She sat at her desk that morning, reviewing documents for the next peace session, but her mind wandered back to the garden, back to his eyes, back to the sound of his voice in the dark. She touched the edge of her sleeve, where his finger had brushed hers by accident. It still tingled. There was a knock at the door, fast and hard. Before she could answer, her assistant entered, face pale. "You've been summoned," she said quietly, "by the High Diplomat." Lorena stood slowly, confused. She hadn't done anything wrong, or so she thought. The meeting room was cold, filled with tension. The high diplomat stood at the center, her long white robe trailing behind her. Several others sat at the table, all watching Lorena with unreadable expressions. "You've been seen spending time with the human commander," the high diplomat said. Her voice was soft, but each word was a strike. "Yes," Lorena answered, keeping her tone even. "We've spoken during curfew hours." "This is unacceptable," said one of the advisors. "It sends the wrong message." "To whom?" Lorena asked. "To the humans or to us?" The high diplomat stepped closer, eyes sharp. "You were sent to negotiate peace, not to become entangled with their kind." Lorena wanted to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Was it wrong, what she had done? Was it weakness to feel something instead of hiding it? "You are ordered to cease all unsupervised contact," the high diplomat said. "From this moment forward." Lorena bowed her head, but her fists were clenched. She left the room without a word, heart heavy, steps slow. Everything inside her felt tight and silent. Later that evening, Jace waited in the garden. He looked at his watch, then at the path, but Lorena didn't come. She always came. Always on time, always with soft steps and curious eyes. But not tonight. He stayed for hours. Alone under the glowing tree, when he finally stood to leave, he found something small resting on the bench. A folded paper note, written in shaky handwriting. "I was warned," it said. "I cannot return, but I did not forget you." Jace held the note in his hand for a long time. He stared into the stars, jaw tight, mind storming. Who had interfered? Who feared peace so much they would tear it apart with silence? And somewhere inside the diplomatic wing, Lorena sat by her window. Her room was cold, her tea untouched. She told herself she did the right thing, that peace must come first, that duty was greater than desire. But when she closed her eyes, all she saw was his face in the garden, waiting, alone. And her heart ached in a way she couldn't explain to anyone, not even herself. Gunfire was never supposed to echo through the halls of a diplomatic outpost. But now it did, sharp and violent, bouncing off the polished walls like thunder. Lorena ducked behind a pillar, her heart pounding, her breath short. Screams and orders filled the air, both human and alien voices overlapping in panic. Smoke crept into the ceiling vents, alarms flashing like wild stars. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't peace. It was a trap, and she knew it the moment she saw the soldiers move not toward the enemy, but toward Jace. Only an hour ago, everyone had gathered in the main hall for a peace ceremony, a show for both worlds, unity on display. She had worn her traditional robes, pale blue and shining. He had stood proudly in his uniform, medals quiet against his chest. Their eyes had met across the crowd, and for a moment, it had all felt real. But then came the sound, the first explosion, the scream, the panic. She pushed through the chaos now, dodging fallen chairs and burning cloth. She had to find him. She had to know he was still alive. Around the corner, she saw it, 3 masked attackers aiming weapons at a group of humans, and in the center, shielding 2 injured aides, stood Jace. Blood ran down his arm, his face burned, but his eyes were steady, even injured. He stood between danger and the helpless. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She raised her arm, activated her emergency beacon, and shouted in her language a code word that called for immediate guard support. The attackers turned toward her, surprised, before they could fire. Security drones blasted through the windows with sharp light and sound. Within seconds, it was over. The attackers were restrained, the hostages pulled to safety. But Jace didn't move. She ran to him, dropped to her knees beside him. His skin was cold, eyes half closed, but he smiled faintly when he saw her. "Told you I'd keep them safe," he whispered. "Why did you stay?" she asked, her voice breaking. He coughed softly, a line of blood on his lips. "Because I knew you'd come," he said. The medics rushed in, pulled her aside, worked quickly. But Lyrena stayed close, never looking away. The thought of losing him felt heavier than anything she had known. Hours later, the halls were quiet again. The wounded retreated. The traitors exposed, one of them a member of her own diplomatic team. They hadn't wanted peace. They had wanted to make the human side look weak, disorganized, but instead, the humans had saved everyone, including her. She sat beside Jace's bed in the medical wing. He was resting, breathing steady now. His hand lay beside hers on the edge of the bed, not touching, but close. Close enough to feel the warmth. The high diplomat entered the room. Her eyes unreadable, Lyrena stood slowly, expecting punishment, silence, perhaps removal. But instead, the elder woman looked at the sleeping human, then back at Lyrena. "He protected you," she said softly. "Yes," Lyrena replied, her voice strong now. "He nearly died for you," the high diplomat said again. "I would have done the same for him," Lyrena answered, without hesitation. A long silence passed. Then the elder simply nodded and left the room without another word. Lyrena turned back to Jace, who now stirred slightly. His eyes opened halfway, and he gave her a slow, weak smile. "I heard that," he whispered. She smiled back through tears she hadn't noticed. "Good," she whispered. "I meant it." They didn't need more words. In that moment, between the soft beeping of the monitors and the silence beyond the walls, something deeper had been spoken. Asterisk. The ship was waiting, engines humming softly like a heartbeat too calm for what it was about to carry. Lyrena stood at the edge of the platform, staring at the glowing ramp that led into the vessel, meant to take her home. Home. The word didn't feel the same anymore. Behind her, human officers moved in silence, carrying crates, checking systems, pretending not to look at her. They had heard the stories, how she had stood by the human commander when the shooting started, how she had risked her life to save him, how she had sat by his side for days while he healed. Now, everything was quiet again. No more alarms, no more enemies, just choices, and a voice in her heart she could no longer silence. Footsteps echoed behind her, calm and steady. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She closed her eyes for a breath, then opened them and said, "You came. I had to." Jace replied, stepping beside her. His arm was still wrapped in a support band. His walk slower than usual, but his eyes were the same, clear, steady, always watching her like she was the only thing that mattered. She turned to face him fully, cloak blowing gently in the artificial breeze. "I was told I'm being reassigned," she said. "Somewhere far, someplace quiet." He nodded once, as if he already knew. "I was offered a promotion," he said. "I turned it down." "Why?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Because peace talks are useless if the people behind them lie to themselves," he said. Her heart jumped, the meaning behind his words sinking in slowly. "You're not a threat to me," he continued. "You're not a mission, or a risk, or a mistake. You're the only part of this place that felt real." She looked away, blinking fast. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not in her world. Not in her life. She had been trained to be quiet, graceful, untouchable. But now she felt completely seen. "Are you asking me to stay?" she asked carefully. "No," he said, and her heart fell for a second. "I'm asking you to choose. Not because someone tells you to, not because of duty or fear, but because you want to." Silence stretched between them. 100 voices echoed in her mind, elders, teachers, history. But one voice cut through them all, her own. She stepped forward, close enough to hear his breath, close enough to feel the heat of him standing still. "I was told humans were savage," she said softly. "And maybe some are. But you are the one I will remember." He didn't speak, but his eyes softened. She reached for his hand, slow, steady, no longer trembling. Their fingers met and laced together without effort. The boarding alarm rang out. Final call. She turned her head toward the ship, then back toward him, and took a step away from the ramp. The guards at the gate watched with confused expressions as the alien ambassador, who had arrived silent and distant, now walked away from her own shuttle, hand in hand with the human she was supposed to fear. Jace didn't smile, and neither did she, but the calm between them said everything. Later, in the garden under the glowing tree, she leaned against his shoulder. The stars above didn't care who she was or where she came from. They simply watched. And so did the rest of the world, as a new kind of peace began, one not signed by paper, but by choice.